So this guy is dead. Or maybe he's just faking the whole thing. Now the guy's name is Samuel, and Samuel's 36 when this story starts, and he's living in New York. But here's the thing about Samuel. He works as a trader at some big firm on Wall Street, and he comes from a wealthy family that's already made a fortune. So Samuel feels like he's got a reputation to live up to. He wants to make as much money as his family did, and nothing is going to stop him, not even the law. So one day in 1995, he decides he's done working for other people. He wants to do his own thing and start his own hedge fund. So that's what he does. He quits his job and he starts one. But Samuel runs into a problem. His hedge fund is brand new. And if people are going to hand their money over to him, he needs a good reputation. Like, people need to trust him. So he decides the best way to get a good reputation is to just fake it. So he starts lying. He lies to investors, he exaggerates his work history and his past roles at other companies. He tells potential investors that he's managed massive sums of money before, when he apparently wasn't. And surprisingly, this actually works. People believe him. I guess he must be a good bullshitter because investments start pouring in. By 1996, Samuel raises a whopping $300 million for his hedge fund. And so now that he's in charge of all this money, for some reason, he decides to take things even further and tell a much bigger lie. He starts telling his investors that he's developed a unique special trading system, one that's so effective that in a decade, it could turn that $300 million into $4 billion, which would be roughly like a 30% annual return, which is just ridiculous and unheard of. Like, this should have been a massive red flag to these investors. But I guess these investors don't really think that deep about it. They're just like, okay, sounds legit. And so everything looks good. Investors are happy and the hedge fund appears to be making money. So now, with millions in the bank, Samuel sets himself up with an extravagant office with nice new computers, expensive decor, and he's even got an aquarium filled with exotic snakes. And he himself is living large. Like, he buys himself a new boat and multiple cars, and he rents a big-ass mansion for $32,000 a month. Damn. Not to mention, bro is also drinking and doing a lot of drugs and just having the time of his life. Good for him. But then, more time passes, and it's now 1998, and something crazy happens. Samuel's hedge fund suddenly suffers a major loss, and some of the investors' money gets wiped out. But instead of coming clean, Samuel decides to hide these losses and lie to his clients. And he starts covering everything up and making it look like his business is going fine. Because the truth is that his unique special trading system isn't really working. It's in fact losing everyone money. So Samuel starts falsifying reports to cover it all up. And that is when he turns to this guy, Dan Marino. Dan Marino is an accountant who works with Samuel. And together, they create their own fake auditing firm to make all the hedge fund's finances look legit and profitable. And believe it or not, this actually works. They make their fake reports look all professional and convincing, and no one seems to suspect that anything shady is going on behind the scenes. So, with these fake reports making everything look good, more investors start pouring in. And pretty quickly, Samuel starts operating the hedge fund as a Ponzi scheme, using new investors' money to pay off the old investors. However, even running it as a Ponzi scheme, Samuel's hedge fund still keeps losing his investors' money. Geez, this guy's really bad at this. In fact, by 2002, the hedge fund had lost around $55 million of investors' money. And so now, Samuel, he's running out of ways to keep this scheme going. And here is where the story gets really wild. Because it's at this point that things in Samuel's life start falling apart. Not only is he running out of ideas to keep his hedge fund afloat, but he develops chronic back pain, and he starts taking painkillers to help with that, and he gets all addicted to the painkillers. This is not going to end well for him. But then, in 2004, he finally gets a little hope. he meets a man who promises to help turn things around for him. This guy, Shay. And Shay is actually a con artist. But he doesn't tell Samuel that. No. He tells him that he is an ex-CIA officer who knows about some top-secret government investment projects that only very few people know about. Not only that, but he claims that if Samuel invests his money with him, that he will double it in just 2 weeks. And crazy enough, Samuel believes Shay. He's like, wow, 2 weeks? And like you would expect someone who had been a trader for over a decade to not fall for a scam like this, but I guess at this point in the story, Samuel's just really desperate. So he wires Shay $10 million of investors' money. Then he wires him even more. And within weeks, he empties all of the hedge fund's accounts and he transfers nearly $150 million to Shay. So what does Shay the con man do with all this money? Well, he of course disappears. And that is when Samuel realizes that he's been conned. And with no money left and no way to pay his investors back, he decides it's finally time to shut everything down. So he writes a letter to all his investors saying that he's closing the hedge fund because he wants to spend more time with his family, but he tells them not to worry, that he'll send them all their money back soon. But, of course, he can't send them all their money back. He doesn't have any of it. He lost a bunch of it trading, and he lost the rest of it when Shay the con man ran off with it. But whatever, Samuel sends this letter, and then he goes completely off the radar. And some time passes. And at some point, his investors start to realize that they never got their money back. And they start wondering if Samuel ripped them off. And so they start freaking out. And soon enough, multiple federal agencies get involved and they start investigating his hedge fund, and it doesn't take long for them to realize that Samuel had been running a big, fat Ponzi scheme all along. And so, by 2005, the feds track him down and bam, they arrest him. Here's his mugshot. And ultimately, he pleads guilty to fraud and he's sentenced to 20 years in prison. So now it seems like he's gonna be locked up for good and he'll finally have to pay for the crimes that he's committed. Until... Okay, now here's the thing about his sentencing. At the time, Samuel is struggling with some health problems. So the judge actually decides to be lenient and he allows him to remain free for about 2 months before reporting to prison, in order to get his affairs in order. But see, Samuel, he doesn't want to spend the next 20 years of his life locked up. He's got a whole other plan in mind. He decides to fake his own death and disappear and start a new life somewhere else. So on the day that he's supposed to turn himself in to report to prison, he just doesn't show up. Instead, he drives to a local bridge and he writes "Suicide is painless" on the dusty hood of his SUV, suggesting that he's about to unalive himself, and then he just disappears, making people think that he jumped off the bridge. And then later, police find his abandoned SUV, and they assume that he unalived himself, and they send the rescue team down to recover his body and everything, but days go by, and they don't find anything, no body, or no other sign of Samuel. And that is when they realize that he had actually staged his death and he is really on the run. And so they release a warrant for his arrest. And 3 weeks go by. And Sam finally he just gives up and turns himself in. So on top of his original sentence, he gets an extra 2 years for trying to escape.